decisions. So now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable unto you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. There's a story about a farmer who hired someone to do some work around the farm. So the first job was he needed to paint the barn. And the farmer thought that that would take, about 3 days. Well, the hired hand comes back after 1 day and says he's finished it. So the farmer is amazed, so he gives him another job. This next job is to go and fix a fence. And it's a big fence, so he thinks it's going to probably take him like 4 days. After a day and a half, this industrious farmhand is able to complete the entire job. So the farmer is amazed. So now he gives him a third job, and he says, now this one's going to be a little job. I've got this pile of potatoes over here, and I need you to divide them up into some smaller piles. This one's going to be for seed, this one's going to be for the hogs, and these potatoes are going to be good enough to sell. And this shouldn't take you long at all. So he goes off to do some more chores, comes back at the end of the day, and the hired hand is still sitting there, and he's hardly started. The farmer says, what on earth is going on? Why are you taking so long? And he says, well, sir, I work really hard, but I can't make decisions. Today's gospel, among its many messages, is about decisions. We see Jesus here in this 4th chapter beginning his public ministry in Galilee. He's learned that John is now in prison, so it's even more important for him to add his voice to the chorus to all to repent because of the inbreaking of the kingdom of heaven. So now in verse 19, Jesus is walking by the sea. And it doesn't seem like he has any prior acquaintance with the fishermen he meets. It's not like this encounter is planned, but rather he just calls out to them and invites them to follow and fish for people. And Peter and Andrew take off their net, leave their nets, say yes to the call, and they follow immediately. Then we get to verse 21. Jesus comes upon James and John, and once again, the encounter seems completely spontaneous, and again Jesus issues a call, invites them to come and follow, and then with little detail other than a very bewildered father sitting in the boat watching his kids leave, they take off, follow Jesus immediately. So what's tying these interactions together? Spontaneous, urgent, immediately calls and responses, all in the midst of daily life. The ordering of these encounters is so beautifully instructive because they both start with God. Did you notice that? That Jesus acts first. Jesus makes a decision first for the fishermen. He sees them. He calls them. He claims them for mission in his name, not because he somehow vetted them in advance, had them pass some kind of test, and figured out that they were somehow superior. These are common, ordinary, anonymous folk. He sees them for the value that they have as children of God. He sees them as people to name and claim as his own because he loves them. He sees them with the eyes of God in Jesus Christ, the same eyes that God sees us in our baptism. Do you see, like Peter and Andrew and James and John, God sees us, names us, claims us, bids us to follow through our baptism. God decides for us. And we have a name for that in these Lutheran circles. We call it grace. And it's ours whether or not we respond. But that brings us to the second half of these two encounters. Because the thing is, these fishermen, they do RSVP. And that's the rub for our own lives. That's where this lesson becomes kind of personal. What do these fishermen have to teach us? Well, one thing's for sure. They were willing to take a risk. They were willing to go out on a limb and be bold for their Lord. They left their life's work to go and fish for men and women. And that conjures up, at least for me, all sorts of people in history who have made that decision to follow the Lord, and it has caused complete change in their life. Think of Augustine. He was a party boy until he was 33, and then he got baptized, became the bishop of Hippo, became one of the most significant theologians in the Roman Church. Think of St. Francis of Assisi. Left his destined life of luxury, sold all his possessions to give them to the poor, and trusted that God would provide. Think of our own heritage with Martin Luther. Goes through a thunderstorm only to endure the wrath of his father after he decides that he will become a monk. And in time creates all sorts of havoc as he reforms the church. People who are transformed and take a risk for the gospel. Next, along with taking a risk, I think it's good to notice that these fishermen at some level must have believed in their potential as disciples. That they must have believed somehow, through some means, they could impact others and compel them to join in Jesus' mission. They must have seen this not just as a job, but as an irresistible call to ministry. Because there's a difference, isn't there, between a job, catching fish, and a ministry, doing something in the name of our faith. When we do something because, well, no one else will do it, it's a job. If we do it because we have a passion to serve, why, it's a ministry. If we do something, as long as it doesn't interfere with anything else we'd rather be doing, why, I'd call that a job. If we do it because we're a stakeholder and we're willing to set aside other things, we're willing to make sacrifices for this, why, it's a ministry. If our interest is only in success, well, it's probably a job. If our interest is primarily to be faithful, why, it's a ministry. If we're doing something because it's only required of us, it's a job. If we're doing something because we believe we have the opportunity to build the kingdom of God, why, it's a ministry. It can be really hard to get excited about a job, but you can't help but be excited about a ministry while you anticipate getting involved in what can happen, while you want to get to it immediately. Oh, where did we hear that word? I think it was in the gospel. Third, these fishermen, they dropped everything because at some level they also must have felt accountable. They didn't turn their heads and see if there might be someone else on the beach that he might be talking to. They didn't close their ears and not listen. They heard the summons, they acknowledged the summons, and they made a decision and they went. They made an RSVP. God had invited them to be in ministry, and they felt like Jesus at some level was depending upon them, and they needed to come through. And as the narrative unfolds in Matthew, we see that they don't always do such a hot job, but they continue because they are invested in the journey. This concept of dropping everything on the spot, following Jesus, it seems extreme. It seems rather unrealistic. And it doesn't even seem all that prudent. In fact, I find it kind of hard to receive a text like this literally, let alone prescriptively. I mean, if we did, we'd have abandoned families all over the place. We'd have jobs undone and unattended to. I think a more poignant way to connect with this story is to recognize in our lives every day we face snap decisions. Oh, there's times sometimes when we can do careful discernment, when we can weigh the pros and cons, when we can make a decision tree, and when we have that opportunity, we should seize it. But let's face it, much of life, I would say most of life, revolves around the unplanned, unscripted, day-to-day interactions we have with the world. Most of the time, we're living in an action-reaction kind of calculus. Most of the time, stuff happens, and we respond to it right then, immediately, because we have to. That plan that you had for the day that goes awry, how do you handle it? And how do you handle the people and the situations that confounded it? How about that traffic that you didn't expect to encounter, and there it is? How about that crisis that just jumps right onto your desk the first time you arrive at work, and you had other plans for the day? How about those random people in front of you and behind you in line at Publix that challenge you when you have other things on your agenda? How about that relative or friend that has a tendency to annoy you in the most inopportune of places, asks favors of you that are beyond the pale, that maybe presumes things about you, and you need to respond? Every day, everywhere, we are called to hear, receive, react to people, situations, trials, issues, and decide how we're going to handle them. So how do you respond? Do you respond like you're the center of the universe? Or that God is? What path do you follow in those decisions you need to make right then and there throughout your day? Do you follow the path of Christ? Or do you follow something else? Is your go-to response to reflect love, patience, understanding, compassion? Or do you find that you're not able to give that all-embracing love? Rather, it's judgment. Rather, it's boundaries. Rather, it's frustration. Rather, it's things that exclude or dismiss. Do you see? God creates us, sees us, calls us, follows us. Not when it's only convenient. Not when it's this thing that we feel like doing. Not when someone is watching only. Not when it fits into our plans. Not when it's going to give us the outcome we expected. We follow Jesus as a way of life. It's as an approach. You don't have to live like an itinerant. You don't have to switch jobs. But you might need to look at how you live in your home and how you react in your job. The evangelical preacher and former president of Dallas Theological Seminary, you've probably heard his name, Chuck Swindoll. He tells the story, he grew up in Texas. He tells the story of an old Texan in his hometown who would say, the problem with the Christian life is that it's just so darn daily. And so it is. So think about your daily decisions. Do you love your neighbor in the way of Christ? Do you care for the creation that Christ made? Do you seek the welfare of others? Right then, right there, when it's sitting in front of you, how do you react? may we see others in the way that Christ sees them, and that our immediate response is one of love, that we follow the path of Christ. Amen. And now may the peace of Christ, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. We sing